The grid was 4 minutes away from going into a catastrophic blackout, a complete blackout. And that was because power plants are not like cars that you can just walk out and turn a key and start the engine and the thing starts up. That power plants, a lot of, particularly the big ones, the ones that make most of our electricity, actually have to pull power from the grid to get everything spinning, to get their pumps operational, get their cooling systems going. If the entire system were to go down, we would have to do what we call a black start. We'd have to start it from basically being in the black, everyone in the dark. An EMP is basically a blast of a fry some certain surface.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Dave Moore, and here with Dr. Joshua Rhodes, a PhD at the University of Texas, Austin, and a really smart guy, knows a ton about electricity and the grid and power, and here on Endgame, and you were on the Endgame series. A lot of people wanted to hear more about what you had to say. We've got lots of emails and feedback. It's a great interview with Patrick. So thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Good. Well, I was looking at your background and just what do you, so I'm going to ask the simple questions like, what exactly do you do? I know you're involved with research down there at the school. What exactly are you doing these days?
Yeah, so my research typically is around systems, the big systems that meet the everyday needs of our life, be it the electricity system or the natural gas system, transportation system, and how all of these things interact, how some of them are fueled by others, and then also how failures in one can affect the other. And we try to look at it from a 30,000 foot point of view, just to see how they interact and how we can make them, better for a better future for ourselves.
I love that. I was reading about your bio a little bit, and you're a thinker. You love math, right? You love to, which I am a science guy, so I always had a hard time with math. But you're a problem solver, it seems, right? So, in reading your bio, you had this eureka moment. I guess you were in before you went back after college, before you went for your multiple master's degree and then PhD. You were doing some construction work. So tell us a little bit about what got you back into school again.
Yeah. So after my undergrad, after my undergrad, I got a master's in mathematics at Texas A&M, and then at that point I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life, and so I just moved to Colorado. I was living in Texas. I moved to Colorado. Just figured, I like to ride bikes. I like to do outdoor things. So I'm just gonna do that. I got a job doing construction, which was in 2009, 2010, which wasn't a great time to be in the construction industry of that financial crisis that happened. And so one day I was just literally swinging a hammer inside of a house, installing, shelving or something. And I was talking to an electrician who was doing some work in the house and just asking him, what he had done before and just, making small talk. And he said he used to be on a crew that was hooking up wind farms in Southeast Colorado. Southeast Colorado is a great wind resource. And so they were building wind farms out there, and asking, why I wasn't doing that anymore. And he said it was because they were having trouble getting enough water to mix the concrete to pour the footings for these things. Because these things are, 300 foot tall, and they have massive foundations, they've got to stand on, because they're harvesting the wind, they got to withstand it. And so it just blew my mind that, in a place where, I was going fishing in rivers, and there seemed like there was water everywhere. You could turn a tap, there was water there, but there was this constraint in one sector that was leading to, constraints in another. In this case, not enough water to make concrete, so that we couldn't have more clean energy. And it really got me thinking kind of in this broad scale sense sort of way, and led me to the University of Texas to study this. Study it further.
That's baffling, like the limiting factor to wind farms and building these structures and creating this energy was a lack of water, not a lack of metal or whatever they make it out of or whatever, right?
Yeah, no, not a lack of metal for the towers, or fiberglass for the blades or anything like that. Just something as simple as water.
Great. So now I'm going to ask you some questions, and I'm going to ask you some questions that I know a lot of people are concerned about these days. It seems like, and there's natural disasters, there's different things that could happen to our power grid. And then there's some intentional, we're worried about attacks and concerns. And so it's definitely a concern these days. But before I get into those specific questions, I want to simply ask you, like, hey, I'm a chiropractor, and I know that we don't have a lot of engineers out there. So what exactly is the grid, or how does that work? And what does it look like, for our country? How is our system set up?
Yeah. So grids can be, can be anything. They can be an electricity grid, they be a natural gas grid, a water grid. It's basically a collection of infrastructure that moves, goods or, service or whatever it is, from the point to where it's, created, either in a power plant or maybe a manufacturing facility, to the point where it's being consumed, be that your house, or your business. And it's this supporting infrastructure that allows these things to be moved around to where they're useful.
So I know in the interview with Patrick, just to kind of get us to that point, but you mentioned there's like 3 major grids in the whole country.
Yeah. So as far as electricity grids go, the U.S. is pretty much broken up into 3 electricity grids. So there's the Eastern Interconnect, which is basically the Rockies east all the way to the East Coast. There's the Western Interconnect, which goes to Rockies west, and then there's Texas. Texas has its own grid and is its own island for electricity.
It seems kind of disproportionate, right? Doesn't it? Most of the country seems to be that Eastern one, west of the Rockies. Then Texas has their own, which is fine. I get Texas, man. I get it. I love Texas. They want their own everything, right?
Yeah, we do.
So why is it set up with so disproportionate? Like, is there a reason for that? It was just the way it was created?
Yeah, it was really in the way that it evolved. Whenever electricity was a nascent industry, whenever it was first starting out, we actually didn't think we were going to be able to move electricity very far. And so each, individual city, or sometimes blocks within cities, would set up their own power plants and distribution grids and, power certain regions. And there was actually competition in some areas for who you were going to get your electricity from. And then as technology advanced and it got better, it became, from a reliability point of view, it became advantageous to connect a couple grids, so you have multiple power plants in case one went down, the other ones could step in. And then that just kind of kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until we connected, massive grids across the US, and we formed these interconnects. If you look at where the grids don't connect to each other, it's pretty rural areas. So it's where demand is pretty low, but they're pretty concentrated in around areas that, that have high demand for electricity, be it a lot of homes or manufacturing or things like that.
Are there subsections to the grid? Could part of it go down, or is that an all or nothing situation? Is it?
No, it's not an all or nothing. So within grids, we have these things called RTOs, which are regional transmission organizations, or ISOs, independent system operators, that kind of manage various parts of the grid. And they kind of act as subgrids, very well connected subgrids within these massive interconnects, the 3 interconnects that I was talking about. And so there are different, sometimes the city might have its own utility and kind of act as its own grid as well, but it's generally going to be connected to a larger piece.
So how old is this technology that they're piecing together? How old is it? An old infrastructure? Is it updated, or is it just something that you just keep adding on to?
Yeah, so there are parts of the grid that are pretty old. There are parts of the grid that have been our current grid that were built in the 40s. Rural electricity really took off in this country with the Rural Electrification Act back in the 30s, when the federal government decided that they were going to electrify the farms. They were going to electrify everyone. Everyone's going to have access to electricity. It made us more productive. And led to better outcomes and better life outcomes for everyone. Basically, that was connected to. And as technologies have advanced, and we've changed out parts of the grid, added different things. We used to get a lot of our power plants used to run on oil. Now, not many of them run on oil. In fact, it's probably a rounding error now. And then we've gone through various different waves of technology. We built a lot of coal, a lot of that's retiring. We built a lot of gas, some of that's retiring. We're building a lot of renewables. So we are turning the grid over as things wear out. But yeah, some of it is still pretty old, particularly some transmission lines. Famously, kind of in California, some of the old ones that need to be replaced or worked on that have failed, and can cause things like fire sometimes.
We are very reliable on electricity. It's really, and I'm not being dramatic, this is the lifeline, because if electricity goes down, I don't think people realize this unless you're in a catastrophe. And many of us, if we are, it's usually short term.
Right.
But rather quickly, things deteriorate on many different levels.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a scary thing, if to say the least. I mean, we talk, and there's even been some talk, and I've heard some people say, like, if the grid was broken or something happened that it damaged it, the turnover, how long would it take, to get something like that back up and going again? And what would be some of the pitfalls in that process?
Yeah, so we in Texas actually had a pretty close scare with the grid going down back in February. About 12 million Texans were actually, and I was one of them, were out of power for 4 days, and things did start to deteriorate. We lost our water system because of that for a large part of the state. We couldn't communicate very well with others, across the state. So it is very vital to our, to our modern life. If the entire grid did go down, we would have to do what we call a black start. And let me back up and say, most of the time when the power goes out, it's the small power lines that are, out on the street or other things like that, tree limbs, squirrels, things like that.
Transformer blows, something like that.
Yeah, transformer blows, something like that. And that's the vast majority of the time when the power goes down. If the entire system were to go down, we would have to do what we call a black start. We would have to start it from basically being in the black, everyone in the dark. And power plants are not like cars that you can just walk out and turn a key and start the engine and the thing starts up. That power plants, a lot of, particularly the big ones, the ones that make most of our electricity, actually have to pull power from the grid to get everything spinning, to get their pumps operational, get their cooling systems going. So they have to consume energy in order to then turn around and make their own energy. And so we have a certain subset of power plants that are black start rated that you can go out there and start, but we'd have to use those to turn on other pieces of the system, and it would take a while. And if we did have a catastrophic failure, there's probably things out there that are broken that we would discover, when we tried to restart it, and that could delay things, further.
So I know, what are some of the threats? What are some of the foreseeable threats to our electrical grid, our electrical system? And obviously we've had some natural disasters and things that broke down that way. But if there were, so we know of things like in Texas where was it the weather that increased the need for heat, that there was an overwhelm? Was that what that was?
Yeah, we had multiple systems fail in Texas at the same time. So one is, the entire state was under, all 254 counties were under a winter storm watch at the same time, which has essentially never happened before. And it pushed demand further than it had ever gone before. And at the same time, a lot of our power plants froze. Their cooling water froze. We had our natural gas system froze. It was not able to produce near as much. And so at the same time, we had, record demand for electricity. We also had about half of our fleet, our power plant fleet, go offline. And because with electricity, you have to match supply and demand in real time. The only thing left for the grid operator to do in order to keep some part of the grid operational was to turn off homes. And they didn't think they'd have to do it for very long, but ended up being a 4-day event.
So knowing what you know, all right, about all of this and more than most of us, right? What are the things that keep you up at night concerning things that could happen that could take the grid out and take it down for some time?
Yeah. So typically, most of the things that take the grid offline are storms or other things like that, but they usually don't cover like an entire section of the grid. It's usually kind of localized in a certain area. The things that could take down the entire grid would be something, like a cyber attack, or even a physical infrastructure attack if they did it in the right spot. They'd have to get it just right to do that. Not just any place can take the whole thing down, but and something like that leading to a cascading failure in other regions, and then the entire thing going down. The closest example we have to that is actually 2003 on the East Coast. There was a tree branch that fell on a line, and that just because they didn't have enough redundancy built in the system, it cascaded into basically the entire eastern seaboard, going black. And then they had to import power from other regions and bring it back up, and it took a long time. do so. But yeah, I mean, I do worry about cyber attacks, messing with our infrastructure. Physical is a little bit less so. So I guess mostly cyber attack, to be honest.
Do you know much about electric magnetic frequencies or impulses?
EMPs?
Yes.
Yep.
So
yeah,
is that a concern, or what exactly is that?
So an EMP is basically a blast of that can fry some certain circuits. And so one of the classic example, a natural example could be a sun flare, something like that, because that naturally does happen sometimes when the sun puts off too much of this, and it can damage satellites and electronics and things like that. A lot of people have talked about EMPs. To set off an EMP that would be large scale enough to take down an entire grid would typically require a blast on the size of a nuclear blast. And so it's like, well, if you're trying to take out infrastructure with an EMP, why don't you just use the blast?
Right, at that point, right.
Yeah,
we'll see that one coming. Hopefully.
Yeah. Hopefully we would see that one coming. And so I think and even though nuclear blast would be catastrophic, its actual sphere of where it would destroy infrastructure relative to the size of a grid is somewhat small. So you'd have to do multiple ones probably to take down an entire grid. And at that point, we probably have bigger things to worry about.
Yeah, we'd have to worry about the nuclear fallout at that point, I would imagine. Interesting. So what are some of the things? I had a guest on, and they were talking about one of the concerns that he had. He was not, he didn't have the degrees that you had, but his concern was that it's a lot of the facilities are so old that if there was the turnaround and getting things back up and going, the limiting factor typically is there's no parts or having to get those. And the second piece of that was that most of these power plants, they're retrofitted for that particular plant. So it's not like you can order, a 975 part or these transformers and they could truck them in. So seems to be very customized in a way, which in a way is probably a detriment in the long run. Is that the case?
Yeah, that could be the case, and you would see issues like that with a catastrophic failure of the system, which is why grids do have protective mechanisms built in to try to push that off. So to use the Texas example in February of 2021, the grid was 4 minutes away from going into a catastrophic breakdown or a catastrophic blackout, a complete blackout. And that was because if power plants sense that the grid frequency, which is a measure of stability on the system, falls to a certain level for long enough, they just start disconnecting themselves. They don't wait for something inside the power plant to break. They say conditions are bad. I'm going to try to save myself. The grid breaks into its constituent parts, and everyone tries to save themselves so that they could be available to come online later. If they happen. If those safeguards aren't built into place, then yes, you can physically destroy power plants by having this mismatch happen, which could take months, if not years, to fix. Yeah.
That is a legitimate concern then, for sure.
Yeah.
Interesting. So I guess we're not going to get too much into preparedness. You're not a preparedness person. You're an information about energy person. So I'm not going to ask you if you're prepared, what you're going to do. We've got people on here that have asked that question. I guess for me, right now they're trying to pass an infrastructure bill as we're having this interview, $1 trillion, and there's something for $3 trillion. In the last interview, you mentioned to Patrick to really redo an existing electric grid. We're talking $5 trillion, right? Do you know if there's any money in these packages to update the current grids?
I think there's a few tens of billions, maybe over 50 billion, going towards upgrading the electricity sector, building transmission lines, firming that up. And so, I mean, that'll help. I do think we're going to need more, given because we invested a lot of money in this system in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and we really haven't put near as much in since then. We've been kind of riding on the infrastructure we built. So it's about time for it to come due for us to, for us to invest more. And while it's a start, I mean, I think we're going to need more if we're going to, demand the same level of reliability from the system that we've enjoyed in the past.
All right, so let's just pretend that you just got the job. You're the energy chief of whatever, if they're in the United States, right? And now you're going to create a new form of it. And I know you think about this. I know you think about renewable energy. I know that you have considered all these things. So in your particular, from your perspective, how would you go about, if you had all the money to do it, how would you go about upgrading or changing the way we do electricity in the United States for safety and for efficiency and for clean energy?
Yeah, no, I actually think we would be good to connect the three major grids that we have. I think the more points, while the more points of interconnection, can lead to more vulnerabilities, but the more well-connected a network is, the better it's able to withstand any part of it actually, going down. And so while there's, vast amounts of really cheap, wind and solar power and hydro and, in certain, parts of the country, it's not always necessarily, where people live. And so better connections between these regions, I think, could move power around and, keep costs down for folks while also, increasing reliability by, adding more of those connections.
Yeah, but let's have some redundancies and checks and balances in the system. So I guess my last question is going to be a little bit out there. All right, but this is end game, so we're just going to throw that out there. I've watched that. I've heard people, and none of them are qualified to have this conversation, but they're like, yeah, Tesla years ago came up with a way to get free energy out of the electrons in the air, and and the government's suppressing that information, and that might be true. I don't mean to say it like I'm making fun of the people, but is that a thing?
I mean, of all the thermodynamic systems and things that I've, studied looking at, how do you convert, some forms of energy, be it mechanical energy, spinning of a shaft, or, potential energy being like water at the top of a hill or something like that, into usable forms of, energy like electricity. There really is no free lunch out there. You have to, it goes all the way back to, the first principles, that, matter is neither created nor destroyed. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. It just changes form. And so if you want high quality energy at the end of the day, you're going to have to start, with something that can give you that. You're not going to be able to get it from nothing.
Understood. And I just wanted to just check on that. I mean, sorry for the silly questions, but I just think that, when I know people have these questions, I mean, I heard it somewhere. So, so really, as we go forward from here, and I really appreciate you being on today. So going forward, how do you see us going forward from this point, as far as being able to be prepared on our own? I know that most of us are reliant on electricity. Many of us work from home. Many of us are. Our water pumps are used for electricity. So do you have any thought for yourself? And I will ask you for preparedness now. Do you have any plan, and you've been through it as well in Texas, anything that you can tell people that what they could expect if we did lose energy and lose power? What are some of your suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always prudent to have some, sort of, backup, really anything. I mean, financial advisors will tell you to have 3 months worth of, house payments and car payments and things, just in case you, lose a job. So, I mean, I think it's prudent to have, multiple days worth of, food, just in case something goes down, or, water, just in case, you're not able to access it in the normal, ways that we do today. So, I mean, I think those are smart, things to do. I mean, that's what I have, but I think the system is pretty reliable, given our, history, with it. And so, I mean, I don't think we have to get too crazy with it, but I do think it's, it's good to be prepared for any kind of situation. I mean, I know in Texas, where, a lot of times, the preparedness stuff that we have is for, hurricanes and things that are going to, hit us and could take our infrastructure out, for a while. And we want to be, prepared for those kinds of things, just like we'd be prepared for any other kind of disaster.
Dr. Rhodes, I appreciate you taking the time today. You obviously have the knowledge and information. You also have the on the ground experience from living through it in Texas yourself. So, anytime you take the time to spend with our community and just share that wealth of information, it's very much appreciated. So thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Have a great day.